faster. So in game number one, they played a London. And Mittens played c5 against Mittens, which is the most imbalanced and dynamic way to play against the London. The knight goes behind the c-pawn, applying more pressure, and this diagonal is open to put pressure on the b2 pawn, which naturally is a bit loose when the bishop goes to f4. The two cats got out to a very, very normal London position, and now mainline theory goes e6 and knight f3 and so on. But immediately the move g6 happens, and just all hell breaks loose. So the point of g6 is to obviously put the bishop here and then castle. However, at this point, Mittens with the white pieces, and by the way, did I say I made them play 2 games? The second game is completely insane. This game is very crazy. Just wait and see, like, just be patient, trust me. The point is that now, since the bishop is going here, it inherently takes an eye off of this pawn. So Mittens with white is like, okay, fantastic, I'm gonna take. Because now black has a very difficult decision. I mean, do you commit this way or do you commit this way? Black now says, okay, stupid, well now I take the entire center. So you've won a pawn, but I've seized the center because both of my knights are on their natural developing positions. This also forces white to make yet another bishop move. And now black says, okay, well, h6. I'm attacking the bishop once again. Now your options are run around like a, you know, like an idiot. And then I'm going to go here. And now really kind of like black is playing white. And what that means is black has more development. I mean, it just seems like black goes first. Of course, black does have many pawns out, and you could argue that they are weak. I will let you argue that. But instead, white takes on f6 and basically says, look, Mittens, you had an opportunity to take my pawn. I guess, well, you want to take my pawn, but now I'm going to, instead of defending, I'm going to counterattack your pawn. And now if you try to play a move like this, well, I get a pawn, I attack your bishop, then I will go here, and then here attacking your queen, and I'm actually doing very well. So now Mittens needs to defend against Mittens with the move queen to e6, and in this very moment, Mittens strikes with the move e4. e4 is a very clever move. The point is that if you take the pawn now, I'm gonna take, it's a fork. But if you take me, not only do I trade the queens off the board and then take back my pawn and defend this one, I also just go here. And actually, now I'm no longer even interested in defending the pawn. I'm straight up interested in just bulldozing you, okay, and winning the game. So because of that, Mittens plays d4. If you're confused which Mittens we're talking about, don't worry, that's kind of part of the joke. White still plays the move bishop to c4. The queen slides out of the way. And now white just basically says, look, you can't have the damn pawn. I'm going to defend the pawn. You should have taken the pawn when you had an opportunity. And black's like, well, I never had an opportunity. And then they get into a cat fight. Too many cat puns. So at this point, it's also very hard to get rid of the white queen. If you play this move, I just keep going. And unlike your, right, like, your pawn can't go backwards. So the queen will just live on b6. And if you try to play this and kick me out, I'll play bishop d5, I'll take your knight, and so on. Like, you will just really never get rid of me. Black does this. And now you can argue, okay, white has what's called a double isolated pawn, right? They're just stuck behind each other. They have no neighbors. B and D pawns are gone, so they can't really be defended by anything. And it doesn't matter. White just starts playing like a total robot. Knight b3 defends the pawn again. White is just not developing any pieces. White went here and now here. White went here and now here. This queen's gone like 5 different squares. Doesn't matter. Developing all the pieces, like, look at this. This is just stuck back here. But it's not an important thing right now. Right now, what's important for white is to stabilize and be up a pawn. You see, white is up a pawn, but has certain problems like a lack of development, a weird queen position, bad pawn structure. White doesn't have 2 bishops. The 2 bishops are traditionally better than 2 knights, or bishop and knight. So despite having the pawn up, there's a lot of problems white has to solve, like the queen being attacked by 2 pieces at the same time. The queen backs up, the knight backs up as well, and now c5 is being attacked yet again. Mittens takes the knight. So at this point, we have 2 bishops versus 2 knights. We have the horses versus the pointy hats. White's advantage is getting lower and lower. Black is certainly doing a very nice job fighting back here. Both sides finally castle their kings, and we enter the middle game stage where, as you can see, the computer really... I think this is Stockfish, by the way. So Stockfish is watching Mittens. because Stockfish destroyed Mittens. You should watch my video, Can Mittens Defeat Stockfish? So Stockfish now kind of watches as like the proud parent, you know, like watching the battle for 3rd and 4th place. You know what I mean? Like France and Argentina, when they were done, they were probably like, oh, yeah, 3rd and 4th place. Actually, before they played, they watched 3rd and 4th place. So Queen E3, Rook D8, and you will notice that this pawn was attacked and it was not defended. For whatever reason, Mittens decided that instead of just defending against the threat, it wants to have some fun, so it played Rook D8. It absolutely allowed this pawn to get captured so that it could counter-capture this pawn, invite the attack on its own king with Queen H7 and so on, give away its bishop, and then try to fight back like this. Completely unnecessary. Stockfish thinks it's completely idiotic to play like this. Stockfish keeps it simple like this. And then keeps fighting with f6 and, you know, moving the queen and putting the queen here. And Stockfish thought that the entire idea of Rook D8 was just too exotic, completely unnecessary. And the other thing is that this very aggressive move forces some pieces off the board. Bishop G5, Queen G5. Now f6 kicks out the queen. The pawn is defended. Now the bishop arrives here. And the bots basically enter an endgame here very soon with this very flashy move that white plays, knight d4, cutting the circulation between rook and bishop, attacking the queen, and black doesn't have to take the knight. Black could try to like go in here and defend everything, but instead black takes the knight, white takes the bishop, black takes the pawn, white throws in this move attacking the queen, and we have a very interesting position where material is equal, but throughout the game, white has had an extra pawn. Right, and so a little bit later, white does in fact win the pawn and is just a clean pawn up. White just has 5 pawns and black has 4. So black never won this pawn back, basically. You know, you go all the way back to like the 6th move of the game. When white took this pawn, I don't think Mittens ever anticipated that 30 moves later, that pawn would be the deciding factor in the endgame. So right now, white is just a pawn up, no questions asked. Now, the way you win a game like this is you obviously need to safeguard your king. You need to either simplify the game correctly or launch an attack on your opponent's king. What does that mean? Well, imagine all 3 pieces got traded. White would be completely winning depending on where the kings are, but if the kings both march forward, when you have 5 pawns versus 4 in an endgame, you're going to win. Now, if you trade into a queen endgame, maybe you win. If you trade into a rook endgame, chances are you don't win. Actually, rook endgames are very drawable. And so now we have b5. Now, this is the biggest advantage that was had in the game. Here, white should have been a little bit more patient, playing rook d4, queen d1, seizing control of the file, and slowly making progress. This was Mittens' biggest advantage against itself that it had. Instead, Mittens played very aggressively with the move f4, sacrificing a pawn with the intended purpose of damaging the position and opening the king. And for the future, the king will march out faster. So actually, f4 is a very interesting idea. The problem is that black just created this barrier on the 6th rank, 7th rank, and just did not let Mittens through, all right? It traded queens, which I told you, trading queens might lead to a drawn endgame. And then the most important thing in a rook endgame is to defend your pawns, defend your king, but you have to use what you have. And you see, it's a 2-on-1. That's called a majority. So by creating a majority attack, you are going to get a passed pawn, which at some point will need to be addressed, which at some point will probably cause exchanges. And when an endgame simplifies down, you have to know how to draw. So if you have 1-on-0 pawns, you got to know how to draw. 2-on-1, you got to know how to draw. And as you can probably tell from my tone of voice, Mittens does create that passed pawn. That pawn is now a permanent nuisance, and likely it will trade off for that pawn, and what we will get is a resulting endgame where Mittens forces a rook trade, and this is just simply a draw. This game went on for like 60 more moves, and I got lazy relaying because you can't actually pair the bots against each other. It just hurt my wrist after a while. Long story short, folks, this is a draw. You'll notice, by the way, black's not trading rooks because I told you, if you're up a pawn in a pawn endgame, you're going to win. The way you draw this with black is essentially you just hang around, and if white moves the pawn too quickly, you win the pawn. If white trades pawns, you're very happy. You just run to the corner where that pawn is trying to promote. And if white tries to make any sort of progress, with king f4, you have a check. At a very well-timed moment, you just kick the king back, and then you can basically do anything you want, but it's probably better to just cover checks. And so this went on for 60 moves, and they drew. So, interesting game. But it was a London, so it was kind of always headed for a draw. But I promised you in the intro that we would get a game that was imbalanced. So, you don't see the names here because we're gonna get to the game. But essentially, this was the opening in game 2. It was a Sicilian, so you know it's gonna be fun. And it was not a Najdorf and not a Dragon, it was what's called a classical Sicilian, which is a very sharp and aggressive and tactical Sicilian. And we had the following positions. This is called the Richter-Rause variation. It's incredibly complicated, and as you can see here, that's exactly what you see on your screen. And I wanted them to play a Sicilian because I feel like bots play their most creative chess in Sicilians. Now, folks, if you're still here with me, if you didn't click out for whatever reason, you gotta watch this whole game because, oh my god, this game blew my mind. So, like all good Sicilian defenses, we have opposite side castling, which means pandemonium is coming. Now, there's multiple ways to play these positions. The bots don't really know theory, so they don't try to just destroy each other. White goes knight b5, attacking the pawn on d6. The pawn on d6 is expendable in the Sicilian. It very rarely can be captured because there's all sorts of tactics, and that's really not the game plan, but the bots don't really know that, so instead, white just straight up wins the pawn on d5. Like, just takes the pawn on d5. However, what does black get for the pawn on d5? I mean, look at this, right? This is very scary. The queen is coming out on a moment's notice. The pawns can always come as well. The knight and the rook on the c-file. There's a reason, you know, they don't play Sicilians really like this. White plays c4, defending the knight in the center with the pawn in front of its king. What does Mittens do? It takes the knight. And now pawn takes d5, because by the way, if you already play queen d5, after queen a5, black is almost just winning on the spot. It's nuts. It doesn't look like it, but white's king is so weak, and the rooks are coming, and the knight is on the way, and the bishop is on the way. So white plays this. Now we have knight a5, white plays d6. What the heck is Mittens doing? It allows a check, and the position is relatively well defended, but what is going on here, right? Like, rook c5 played, and Mittens just doesn't care. Mittens plays pawn to d7. Just marches the pawn onto the 7th rank. Black plays queen b6. Black is ready. I mean, a6, knight c4, it's all on the way. Rook b5 potentially at some point. And here the computer insanity begins. Mittens plays rook e1. It hasn't developed any pieces. Do you know what the idea is? The idea is to meet the move a6. Not with a retreat, which would lose on the spot, but the move rook to e... What? Rook e8. The point is that when you lose the knight, okay, when you lose the knight, the attack is blocked. In the meantime, I will go here. I cannot make the queen, even though that's kind of my idea, but I can go here. That's mate. That's all. Not only is that checkmate, when you block checkmate, I have this using yet another pawn in front of my king. I'm attacking your rook, and I am attacking your knight. And if you play the move rook to c6 in this position, I will take the queen, I will take the knight. When you move like to a6, for example, I will then take the pawn, and after you go here, I will play a4 and rook c1 and rook c8, and I win the game. Mittens saw all of this. It literally saw the conclusion of the entire game, if that were to happen. Which means the other Mittens was like, okay, so if I save my rook, I probably lose an endgame, so take my rook. Now we will play this position where I've won your pawn, and I'm now going to activate my knight. This is nuts. It's basically knight versus rook, and white has a butt-naked king. There is just no space at all in front of this king. King is a permanent liability. If you take, you probably invite more problems onto yourself than you're willing to admit. So, queen to g3 played. Black arrives with the knight. The king goes to c1. It doesn't even go to the corner. Do you know why it doesn't go to the corner? Because if you play the traditional corner defensive move, you get mated. Just in one. game is done. So that doesn't happen. The king walks to the center. Folks, keep an eye on this king because this man runs a damn marathon in this game. Bishop g5 check. If you're looking at that move and you're thinking that's a free bishop, you're right. And then queen d3 and you're mated basically